Hello and welcome to episode 545 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva. And today we have a very, very special guest. This is a young man who has dedicated his entire life to studying the hip swivel and hand size of 21-year-old men. A young man, one of the favorite guests of the show, been on the show at least 3 or 4 times. The king, one of the kings of the prospect evaluator draft Nick Streets. It is Mike Renner of Pro Football Focus. Mike, how's it going today, buddy?
Going great. My job sounds way cooler when you describe it as just studying dudes' hip swivels. That's what I grew up praying I would do.
What a life. Evan, how's it going today?
It's going well. Got to hang out with Mike at a Notre Dame game last year. Got to throw the football around a little bit with him. He came to our little tailgate, so that was really nice of him. He didn't have to do that. And
I don't have the gloves you gave. The gloves are right over in my locker, right over there.
Awesome. I bought these wide receiver gloves from Play It Again Sports, and dude, like, it's unbelievable how sticky they are. Like we're out here making one-handed catches. You just catch everything. But yeah, thanks for coming out. That was the Stanford game, though, wasn't it?
Oh
my God. It was.
We have 2 Notre Dame freaks on the show here today. We won't be talking about tight ends, so luckily we won't have any Michael Mayer controversy. Somebody said on a previous show something slightly negative about Michael Mayer, and Evan just about had a heart attack. So we'll be
negative about him. So
we're not covering that today. Anyways, on today's show, what we are going to cover is fantasy relevant quarterbacks and wide receivers who will be drafted later this month. Obviously, landing spot and draft capital are 2 massive factors when it comes to evaluating these guys for fantasy impact. But I do think that simply understanding who these prospects are, what they do well, and where they might win in the NFL is super important. Before we get into it, important note, if you're listening to this, we are discussing and perhaps releasing some draft props for free this year. Again, NFL draft props for free this year, but you must be in our Discord. Our Discord is exclusive to people who have an active ETR subscription. The draft props channel is open to anyone with any active sub. Draft kit, NFL in-season, XFL, PGA, USFL is about to start, NBA props, anything. If you need instructions on how to get into the Discord, go to the team tab on EstablishTheRun.com, then go to Establish the Discord. Also, reminder, best ball season never stops. Our friends at Underdog have launched a Superflex tournament. Massive. Our ranks for that are up and adjusting for everything that we have been talking about, everything we know. If you don't have an Underdog account yet, use promo code ETR at UnderdogFantasy.com for a $100 matching sign-up bonus. That's promo code ETR at UnderdogFantasy.com. Last thing, as I mentioned, USFL starts Saturday. We are covering it. Same format as we covered the XFL. Head to the site for more if you're interested in playing USFL DFS. All right. Start with the quarterbacks here, Mike. Big market movement lately. And this is not a draft props show. We'll have another draft props show soon. This is not a draft props show, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that the market now thinks Bryce Young, not CJ Stroud, will be the number 1 overall pick. I'm curious if that's the pick you would make, number 1. And number 2, we have to talk about Bryce Young's size. I know he measured 5'10", 204 at the combine. The reports are that his playing weight is closer to 190, which is really small. I mean, he'll immediately be the smallest quarterback in the entire NFL, smaller than Kyler Murray, smaller than Drew Brees was, et cetera, et cetera. Mike, who would you take number 1 at quarterback? And what do you think about all this Bryce Young size stuff?
To me, it's Bryce Young. And to me, it's like, I have him a clear ways above the rest of this class. I think he's not quite. I'd probably put him behind like Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence in terms of like recent number 1 overall picks. But he's really only because of the size. Is the only reason I'm not putting there. Because on the football field, he's like nearly as storied and just in terms of his career as like Trevor Lawrence, right? He was number 1 high school quarterback, 5-star recruit, quarterback, the number 1 high school in the country also. Out in California, goes to Alabama, wins the Heisman his very first year as a starter. Like, you can't have a career as good as what this guy's done. There's just not too many other careers that have been better than him from start to finish. And I just watch him on tape, and he has that creative ability outside of structure and even within structure that the high-end guys have. That just no one else in this draft class has. It's just rare to see him be able to process information that quickly. And so that's why size, whatever, I don't think it's going to impact him on a football field in terms of playing, like performance. It's just how many hits can he take at that size? And that to me is the biggest worry, is just availability with him. But when he's that far and away better on a football field, I think he should be the number one pick. He's number one quarterback on PFF Sport. I think he stays healthy. He's a special player at the next level.
Would you consider him, or how would you compare him to Kyler Murray? Because that's the comp that everyone throws out. How would you compare Bryce to Kyler Murray?
So Kyler Murray is a better athlete. They're probably, like I said, same height. They were same, obviously similar weight, but Kyler Murray's more built. He's more like a pure runner. Now, Young can run. I think, just watching him as an athlete, like he could play slot receiver tomorrow in the NFL. Like he moves that way, where he's sudden, he's quick, he's difficult to really pin down and really hit solidly because of that. Like he's very twitchy with just his body. And so that's how he avoids a lot of big hits, is because he has that end of athleticism, but he's not high end fast. He's not obviously high end strength either, but man, he's so light in his feet and so escapable that he's always buying time, and he'll rack up yards. I think he had the second best rushing yards per carry as a scrambler of anyone in this draft class, behind obviously Anthony Richardson, but like he'll create in that manner. You're not going to use him in the running game though.
Evan, I'm curious if you had a chance to look at these guys and who you prefer between Bryce and Stroud, and are you buying the Panthers want Bryce rumors?
I think that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are both really good. I think that Anthony Richardson is extremely intriguing. I have not been a big fan of Will Levis so far, and Hendon Hooker I think is really interesting because of this offense that they ran at Tennessee. His age, that's my like little rundown of the quarterback class. But I want to get Renner's take on what are the aspects that, as you said, you have Bryce Young as the clear number one, maybe in his own tier even. What are the aspects of his game that make him significantly better in your mind than CJ Stroud?
The biggest one to me is pocket presence. You watch Bryce Young in pockets, and he always seems to find like the little space to make plays. And when it's collapsing around him or when things are kind of going bad, he doesn't really feel it. Whereas Stroud, he obviously played behind an insanely good offensive line. You'll see, his two tackles this year are going to be both top 50 picks. Going to have a center who's like a top 100 pick that he played behind too. Like that was the most talented, in terms of like NFL at least, offensive line in the country. And when things got a little hairy, like when a tackle was getting walked back, you see it's really like a big exaggerated movement for Stroud. It's rare to see him be able to feel that pressure and then still keep his eyes up and make plays. So I think that's the biggest difference. And that's like a must-have trait at the NFL level. You have to be able to not let, one guy along your offensive line who's maybe losing his block. You can't let that ruin a play. You still have to operate and still go through your progressions and whatnot, as long as that's the case. So that's the biggest difference between those two, in my eyes, is just that ability. And then Young, on the move throwing, is a better thrower. You watch even Stroud's pro day when he was even just boot action stuff, moving to his left, moving to his right. You saw his accuracy really suffer. I think he missed 3 throws on the move at his pro day, and he only missed like 4 throws all day. And there were 3 of them that were him moving. So I think mechanically he's much more of a robotic player, whereas Young is much more of your free-flowing creator. Like he can just whatever arm angle needs to be made to make a throw, he can get there.
Yeah,
this isn't necessarily all apparent on tape, and that's what we're mainly talking about film study right now. But another thing that we've heard is that Bryce Young, the reviews from Nick Saban and the coaching staff, like they absolutely love this dude at Alabama. He's like a legit leader. The players would rally around him. He tested really well, and I don't even know if they do the Wonderlic anymore. They're doing the S2. He tested really well, and then the sort of off the field reviews on CJ Stroud are a little bit more mixed. I don't know if you've heard anything to that effect.
Yeah, I haven't seen Stroud's S2 score. I know Young had a really high one. I know Levis had a really high one. I know last year, like Brock Purdy, that was his thing. He had a really high one. And I put some stock into that in terms of just like ceiling potential in terms of decision making.
I think Purdy had the highest one of all the quarterbacks, I think, last year or something.
Yeah, I think that was the case. And that is when things are breaking down, how many variables can you keep track of, really, is what a lot of those tests are. They are dots on a screen, and it's, shows you highlights 5 of the 30 dots and then moves them around or puts them all back to the same color, moves them around and says, where are those 5 dots now? That's those are applicable things to an NFL field. So I know scouts who put stock in those tests a lot. And that's one where, if a guy like Bryce Young scoring highly, which is not surprising at all, given how he plays on the football field, that's something that's easy to buy into for, the upside of development between the years.
Let's talk a little bit more about CJ Stroud. He's not particularly thick either, but at least he's tall, 6'3", 214, redshirted his freshman year when Justin Fields was Ohio State's quarterback. Then he went nuts in 2 seasons as the starter, similar to Bryce Young, 8,000 passing yards, 85 passing touchdowns in 25 games. I know Alabama has great receivers also, but CJ Stroud's been throwing to Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN, who we'll talk about, Marvin Harrison Jr., who looks like one of the best prospects ever, people are saying, at the wide receiver position. I don't know if we can hold that against CJ Stroud, but yeah, any more thoughts on that and about who he's been throwing to and how much that helps him?
I do think that's a knock, right? There are layups on his tape that just don't exist, and especially when you compare it to Levis, especially when you compare it to Anthony Richardson. And there's issues with that offense, as we've kind of seen with Justin Fields, that they do a lot of holding the ball by design. You are in that offense asked to wait for a receiver to get 20 plus yards downfield to make his decision on a route, and where you're throwing is based off of what the wide receiver decides. And so whenever that's the case, you can't be a quick decision maker. You have to do that. And that's just, they know they can do that because they have the receivers to do it and they have the offensive line to do it. So he's going to have to relearn some aspects of playing because of that. But man, the receiving talent, he had 3 first-rounders last year, 2 first-round. I think Emeka Egbuka also, we didn't even mention, I think is going to be a first-rounder in 2024 when he comes out. It is insane the amount of talent he was working with. So when he's a guy who's very much a point-and-shoot type of quarterback, he is a pocket passer. He can run when given a runway, but he's kind of like Desmond Ridder last year, where Desmond Ritter's not all of a sudden breaking a pocket and then you're worried about him. You're like, oh, what's going to happen next? It's if Desmond Ridder has a free access, he can get out in space and run. That's how I feel about Stroud. You give him free access, he can run, but is he ever going to go for 500 rushing yards in a season? I highly, highly, highly doubt that. So, but as far as accuracy, he's pinpoint, intermediate, deep. He hits a lot of those throws. That's his selling point, is that he's very good with his timing, very good with his footwork, almost to a fault. Like I mentioned, the roboticness to him, but it ends up in him not missing a ton of throws on tape.
I think a question that we ask Renner almost every year that we do this is, how do you separate the quarterback how do you evaluate him independently of all the players around him? And, we talked about this with Tua, notably. And I mean, every year we're talking about Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, guess what? He's pretty damn good, but he was surrounded by, a bunch of studs at LSU too. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a good question really to bring up every year.
Yeah. And it is the crux of quarterback evaluation. And it's why you lean towards physical ability, at that position, at least trend towards it, because that stays the same, right? Your arm doesn't get any weaker. Your, quote, your athleticism, your ability to run doesn't change from college to the pros. So that's why the guys with the high end stuff, like the Anthony Richardson of the world, is why you're going to see them go highly in the draft. But it's something that you have to almost not credit the things PFF grades only can do so much, because, we're still going to give you credit for a 20-yard throw, even if it was a layup by NFL standards. So it's something that you almost have to, everyone you see, if they are easy throws on their tape, they're almost gone. You have to watch them and how they operate in the worst of situations, knowing that when it's the best of situations, everyone's going to do the job right. Or at least when you're thought about to this caliber of prospect, that you do the job right in those situations. You almost assume that. It's what can you do when things are a little hairy is, I think, what you have to lean on and have to lean into to separate Young, Stroud, Richardson, Levis.
Well, talking about the physical ability, I mean, that's the perfect segue into the, sort of regarded as the number 3 quarterback in this class, and that's Anthony Richardson. Let's just start. What did you think of his supporting cast? I know they fired their coach, Dan Mullen, before coming into this year. I don't know. What do you think about the supporting cast for Anthony Richardson? Because I think that we all probably agree. I think it would be a consensus that this guy has remarkable physical ability.
Yeah, so it was obviously not – it didn't look anything like Stroud's. I think his offensive line was an issue at times, and I don't think they tailored that offense to his strengths by any means. It really didn't feature him the way you would probably want to as a runner. Like, he only went for I think something like 700 yards as a runner, when he is, to me, right up there with Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields as good a runner of the football as you'll see. Like, he is special in that regard. I think I tweeted out the other day, he had the highest average yard per carry on scrambles that we've ever charted for the course of a career. It was 12.4 yards per scramble, 50 scrambles over the course of his career. He's just when he's out in space, the guy is insane. But so I worry, you go throw for throw on him, and he is, as much as, he's probably trying to make some more challenging throws than others because he didn't like throwing underneath. He didn't want to, but also it's because he didn't want to, because he's not super accurate at those either. He does have big accuracy issues, and it just really comes down to how much you think you can fix his accuracy, because he has such a high floor from that rushing ability, as we saw with Jalin Hurts the past couple of years. If you just buy into that, give him a good O-line, you don't even have to pass the ball, and you're going to score points. You're at least going to be better than what Zach Wilson looks like with the Jets, right? So I think that gives him a floor, but it's just he really is inaccurate with the football right now, to the degree where you're not operating an NFL passing game with him.
I have never seen people so angry about any positive Anthony Richardson talk. I tweeted something maybe 3 weeks ago, and I'm no draft Nick, whatever. I just tweeted something innocuous about Anthony Richardson. Holy cow, they were going nuts in my mentions about how bad Anthony Richardson sucks for a week straight. And I get it. Completion percentage matters. I think completion percentage, we would all agree, matters. This guy had a 53.8 completion percentage in college. It's not good. But everybody just writes it off you can't get better when you're in the NFL. You can't get better. You can't. Josh Allen got a lot better. Jalen Hurts got a lot better. And even if you only give Anthony Richardson maybe a 5% chance to ever reach those guys, it's still, to me, worth a gamble very high. We have never seen a bigger athletic freak at the quarterback position. 6'4", 244, weighs as much as Derrick Henry, ran a 4.43, had a 40-inch vertical, and a 10.9 broad. Relative athletic score has him as the most athletic quarterback ever. Ahead of Cam Newton, way ahead of Jalen Hurts ever. So I understand the hate. I completely agree with what Renner is saying. If you think that you can get him to be more accurate, he is an absolute smash. I know most mocks have him going to the Colts because of the Jalen Hurts, Shane Steichen stuff, which I think would be a reasonable fit. Evan talks about his possible fit with the Lions too. So I don't know, man. To me, this is the most interesting fantasy one, because if Anthony Richardson starts 17 games in fantasy, he's going to be a top 12 quarterback. Would you agree with that, Renner? I know you're not much of a fantasy guy, but just from the rushing ability.
Oh, year one, yes. Yeah, 100%. Year one, who would I bet on to be the best fantasy quarterback? It's him if he's starting, because
right.
There's no learning curve for running the way he does. That translates immediately to the NFL. It's just, are you going to buy in and run him that much right out the gate? And truthfully, at his size, I think you do. And if you were just, if you want to, I think why you feel comfortable drafting him so highly is because, say he doesn't learn how to get any more accurate, he completely fails at quarterback, say. You move this guy to tight end, and he's probably a first-round pick at tight end still, right?
Oh, baby.
That size, that speed, that athleticism, you don't have to – you show me him catching 2 balls outside his frame, and I'm drafting him in the first round.
Right.
That's a special athlete that just doesn't exist.
It's interesting the way that you describe Anthony Richardson is the perfect dichotomy. Always in the NFL, there's I wouldn't say always in the NFL, but very often in the NFL, there's a battle between scouts and coaches when it comes to certain players. The coaches are going to think that they can, fix the accuracy of the quarterback. The scouts are he's not, he's not very good. He's got all these problems. They're looking at the problems. The coaches are looking at, oh, well, we can improve him in this area. And we've also heard that specifically for the Colts, that Chris Ballard, who's a scout, at heart, is not sold on Anthony Richardson, that Shane Steichen really likes Anthony Richardson. So it makes a lot of sense the way that you describe it.
For sure. All right. Will Levis. I actually know Will Levis a little bit because he was at Penn State for 3 years. One of those was a redshirt year. But at no point, and I don't follow that closely Penn State football, but at no point did he seem to challenge Sean Clifford. And it's hard for me to imagine taking a guy with a top 10 or top 15 pick who couldn't beat out Sean Clifford. Now, I know that's a very donkish, elementary way of evaluating a player. I mean, God, I watched Sean Clifford play a lot. It was not pretty. Why couldn't Will Levis beat him out? And what do you think about Will Levis, Mike?
I can't speak to why he didn't beat him out. I mean, that's not an uncommon theme, right? Russell Wilson got replaced by Mike Glennon. Mm-hmm. You had Joe Burrow not beating out Dwayne Haskins. Then obviously Haskins first rounder, but
Joe Flacco and Tyler Palco back in the day.
there are coaches out there who make poor personnel decisions. It's not a unique thing, but I do think you've also seen him take big leaps, just in terms of how he plays the game of football, and is why he's indicative of why people bet on Athletic Tools, is because he is high end arm talent, in terms of just release speed paired with velocity on his footballs. It's the best in this draft class. He has a better arm, from when he decides to throw to where the ball gets to than even Anthony Richardson. The ball gets there just faster. And that just allows you to attack windows that other guys can't in this draft class because of that. So that aspect is obviously a great starting point for the quarterback position. And then the toughness, he's getting regarded as this because he is Will Levis, the same guy, not under pressure versus when he's under pressure. To a fault at times, in that he'll take some bad sacks, he'll fumble the football. But that's something that NFL evaluators love. That was Daniel Jones at Duke, right? He was a guy who he could be working from the worst pocket imaginable, and it didn't matter. His mechanics were going to be the same. Was going to step into the throw. You see that from Will Levis. I think he had the second most passing yards under pressure this last year, and he didn't pass that much. And that's in the entire FBS. He had the second most. He was good, legitimately, still moving that offense when under pressure. It's just that he is very inaccurate. And can you fix that? If you promise me you could fix his accuracy, I'd take him above CJ Stroud. I'd take him above Anthony Richardson in this draft class because I think he plays the quarterback position more so how it's supposed to be played at the NFL level already. But that's a big if. He's obviously had 5 years to do it between Penn State and Kentucky and hasn't. Why not? I'm not certain, but if you can convince me he can, I'd take that guy super highly. If he is right now, he's probably never going to lock down a starting job in the league.
I mean, this dude's almost 24 years old, if I'm not mistaken, right? And to me, that's a big factor. If you haven't done it by the time you're 24, I don't know if you're ever going to do it. And I would add that when you're already 24, I mean, obviously the window for you to be a franchise quarterback is a little bit smaller than some of these other guys who are 21 or 22. So yeah, I can see the holes getting poked. I understand why he's number 4. Evan, you said you didn't really like Will Levis from what you've seen so far. Any more thoughts on him before we move on?
And I've only seen one game so far, but Will Levis, I mean, he just struggled to move the ball against Missouri. And to me, it wasn't pretty. Renner's watched a lot more of Will Levis, so I would definitely side with his point of view. But yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like Will Levis has accuracy issues that, Anthony Richardson also does, but Will Levis doesn't move anywhere as well as Anthony Richardson does. And that's a big, big difference.
All right, let's get to a guy who's been rising lately in Hendon Hooker. There was some over 4.5 quarterbacks to be selected in the first round. They're pretty good plus money for a while there. It's now come down as more Hendon Hooker buzz, round 1 buzz has come on. Do you think, Mike, Hendon Hooker is worthy of a first round pick? Obviously, this guy started at Virginia Tech, transfers to Tennessee. People have all kinds of things to say about Tennessee's offense, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, what do you think about Hendon Hooker as a round 1 prospect?
This rise or whatever. And then you had Mike Tannenbaum tweeting out he'll be the best quarterback in this class. Like, I don't get it. I don't see it. I just wholesale don't see it. And now from just like a pure physical perspective, like he's a good athlete. He has arm strength, probably third of these top five, probably the third best, like pure arm strength, right behind Levis and Richardson, in my opinion. So a good arm. But his stats this past year were, fake, as we'll get to when we talk about like Jalin Hyatt in the receiver conversation. Like that offense is not how you play quarterback in the NFL. And I get that it's easy to buy into the fact that, his dad was a football player. He's kind of a guy who's works really hard. You've seen the year-on-year improvement, kind of what, the Jalen Hurts sort of saga, where it's like Jalen Hurts was not, the most gifted all-around prospect, but he worked his ass off. Year 1, year 2, year 3 is what you could be getting in Hendon Hooker. It's a guy in that sort of mold. He's similar makeup mentally. Even that being said, he's, I think, as old as Jalen Hurts is right now. He's going to be 25 years old as a rookie. He's coming off torn ACL, and he's playing in an offense that just doesn't prepare you to the NFL whatsoever. At that point, I really struggle to see why I would, with one, you get one first round pick, why I would use that on that guy who just may not even play as a rookie. I don't see it. I don't think it ends up happening. I could be proven wrong on this come draft day and look like an idiot, but man, it is wild to me, this meteoric rise. I
think Hendon Hooker's agent actually PayPal'd Mike Tannenbaum $100 after he tweeted that. So
I think there's a different argument between do you think he'll be good and do you think he should be a first round pick, because a break-even rate at quarterback is so low. Like if a guy is good, like Bill Barnwell, you guys should go back and read his article. It came out yesterday, the day before, about like value of draft picks. And the quarterback, your break-even rate was something like tiny. Like if he's good only 5% of the time, it's still worth a first-round pick because quarterback is so valuable, and the delta between how much they make on their rookie contract versus how much veterans good quarterbacks make is so high. So yeah, highly recommend that Bill Barnwell. So there's a difference between, will Hendon Hooker be good and is he worth a first-round pick? 5% chance. We'll see. But I do think that some team will probably. I actually kind of think Hendon Hooker ends up going in the first round just because quarterback position always gets elevated on draft day. All right.
And then you know what? If he doesn't play as a rookie and then you don't get him on the 5-year, like you're only getting him for 3 years if he lasts until day 2.
Right. Are there any other quarterbacks, Mike, that fantasy people should know about? It feels like I've only heard about 5 quarterbacks in this entire class.
I will say I like Tanner McKee from Stanford as like a day 2 guy. But is he going to become fantasy relevant? Probably not for, you're a day 2 quarterback, not for like a couple of years.
Yeah.
Because he can't really move.
Yeah, he's just. We were at that game. We saw him carve up Notre Dame, unfortunately. But he's a pocket passer through and through, more so than any of those guys we just mentioned.
Okay, let's talk about wide receivers in this class. The market originally had Quentin Johnston, who we'll get to in a second, as the favorite, but lately there's been so much steam on Jaxon Smith-Njigba to be the first wide receiver off the board. I mean, doesn't look all that impressive to me. He's played almost exclusively in the slot, which is normally like not what you want in a high first round pick. 6 foot tall, 196, 4.52, like nothing really jumping off the page. Would you agree that he is the number 1 wide receiver prospect in this class, Mike? And any more thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think he's going to come off the board first. And at our final rankings, he's going to be wide receiver 1. I just think the level of certainty with him is so high. Now, is he, could he be Jarvis Landry at the next level? Possibly, but that's like, again, that was a guy who got traded for a third off the franchise tag. Like that's a guy who went for 1,000 yards fairly consistently when he was in his prime. That's still somewhat valuable. And I think he's considerably better than even Jarvis Landry was coming out. So I just think with the rise of passing games the way they are nowadays, with two safeties playing back so much, you have to have guys that can work underneath intermediate. It's why Cooper Kupps are in vogue, why Amon-Ra St. Browns are in vogue.
Yeah. I was going to say, could Amon-Ra St. Brown be a decent comparison for him?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's going to be his usage, and he goes to an offense that's willing to put him in that role. And 100 catches, 1,000 yards year 1, I think is not even a stretch like that. Like he is as polished a slot as you'll see in the draft. And that's why I just think I think that's still worth a lot. I think that still ends up going highly this year.
It wouldn't have previously, right? Like previously people wanted Amari Cooper or Jamar Chase or these like alpha receivers that can play all over the field. But yeah, there's a lot of slot receivers in this class, which we'll get to here. Okay, so Jaxon Smith-Njigba, number one. I actually think, and I'm hopeful that this hits because we took like 6-1, 7-1 on Zay Flowers to be the number one wide receiver off the board. I don't know if that's going to hit, but there's a lot of buzz on Zay Flowers lately. Do you think he is worth a first-round pick? Because honestly, like, there's a lot of wide receivers here that I don't even know if they're slam dunk first-round picks. Like, I understand wide receivers are a pretty valuable position in the NFL, but if you take that out, there might only be one first-round wide receiver. But what do you think about Zay Flowers as a first-round pick, and do you think he has a chance to be better than JSN?
Yeah, to me, I really only have like two slam dunk first-round grades in this class. Zay not one of them. He's more like a fringe first-rounder, but I see why he would be coveted because he has that, he has that kind of all-around athletic ability that's like fast, but also quick, that just it's difficult to stick with. And it's even more difficult when like a quarterback breaks the pocket that you just can't stay with that guy. He's just so nimble. And what's that going to look like at the next level? Because he is smaller, I think like 5'9" with like a 6-foot wingspan. Not a lot of guys really being consistent. That's not a consistent 1,000-yard mold, right? But there's so many teams just looking for high-end athletes that scare defenses in the way that it was like a poor man's Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle's like a poor man's Tyreek Hill, but like that's the mold of wide receiver you're getting with Zay Flowers. That people are kind of like, there's really only so many of those guys. I want one. And so I can see why he'd go higher than maybe I'd have him ranked in this class.
Okay. The why that surprised me, I was looking at Daniel Jeremiah's top 50, I believe it was, his number one wide receiver in this class by a wide margin. And Evan and I and Amico talked about this last week, is Jordan Addison, 5'11", only 173 pounds. And 4.49. I mean, I get that it's getting more and more en vogue with these small wide receivers. Devontae Smith obviously has had a lot of success as a skinny guy. You know, Tyreek Hill at 180 pounds. It still concerns me to some level. Like people were taking freaking Tutu Atwell in round 2, which was laughable. But anyways, not that I'm comparing Jordan Addison to Tutu Atwell. But yeah, I was shocked that Jeremiah had him so high. Did you see that? What do you think about Jordan Addison as a round 1 pick?
I see why he has him so high. Like he's just so fluid. I think he has a really high floor. Like I think at the worst, you're looking at someone maybe, I'm trying to think of like a good comp for him at the next level. Maybe like a Zay Jones is like his worst case scenario at the next level. And then he's like a good 3. And why like on tape, you just see it's easy for him to run routes. Like he can run the full route tree, really no questions about that. But like, I do have questions about the frame. Because he is definitely, 173. I worry about him more than like a Devontae Smith because Devontae Smith had like a 6'6" wingspan. Jordan Addison doesn't. He has short arms, small hands too, like under 9-inch hands, and has drop issues on tape already at USC and at Pittsburgh. He's been kind of consistent throughout his career. So I do have much bigger concerns with him. I actually have him behind even Zay Flowers on the board, but think like, he's going to produce at the NFL level. So I think he has a high floor, but I just never see him turning into like an alpha or even like a Calvin Ridley type of high end. If you're thinking like that's a high end for a guy in that mold where it's like undersized route runner types, I think Calvin Ridley was even a better prospect.
I think that one of the first things that I thought when I started looking at these wide receivers and reading and learning about them and looking at their production and, were they good in their return game? That's something that we've seen in the past, like receivers that get action in their return game. Actually, Jordan Addison was pretty good in the return game at Pitt. That they're really good with the ball in their hands. But one of my first takeaways when I started studying these wide receivers was I don't think that they're that good. I don't think it's a very good wide receiver class, and we've had some really good wide receiver classes recently. Mm-hmm. It also makes me wonder. I mean, Jeremiah is a pretty good evaluator. He's like a true scout. He talks to a lot of people. He's very plugged in. So I'm sure that he even subconsciously builds in rankings around the league into his own rankings. Has Jordan Addison as the number 9 overall player in the entire class.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like a very good draft to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that's one like really high, but I also would agree that there's so few guys in this class that I just know are going to be good. Right? Usually in a draft class, you have like a dozen or so that you're like, yeah, there's just like no path to them being bad. All these wide receivers, besides Jaxon Smith-Njigba, there's a path where they just don't work out in the NFL, right? And I did not find that to be the case last year when we're talking about Olave, Wilson, JMO, and London.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we buried the lead here because at least Quentin Johnston has a path to being an alpha. He's 6'2", he's 208, he ran 4.5. Maybe not the best route runner right now, I think is the knock on him, but maybe he can get better there. At least he looks like getting off the bus. Quentin Johnston looks like the NFL receiver. The problem, I think a lot of people are like, oh God, these TCU wide receivers. I already got burned on Josh Doxson. I already got burned on Jalen Reagor. Is it going to be the same thing with Quentin Johnston? His stock has actually fallen. Like I said, he was the favorite to be the first wide receiver off the board. Now he's a pretty big dog to do so. Where do you come down on Quentin Johnston, Mike?
Yeah, I would have worried more if he didn't have the playoffs. Like against Michigan, I mean, what, you go for over 200? Against Georgia, like he obviously didn't produce, but you go and watch him when he's matched up with Keely Ringo, and he was winning those matchups and had the one obviously big play down the middle, get overthrown and picked by Max Duggan. Like Duggan cost him a lot of production over the last 3 years. It was not a reciprocal relationship there between QB and wide receiver. So I'm high on Quentin Johnston. I think that is what, like you mentioned, that's what an alpha number one looks like. Now, is he there yet? No, like for sure not there. I think he's a better route runner, though, than maybe he's been given credit for. But I just think he's going to be a limited type of route runner. He is going to run your vertical tree on the outside. He's not going to be running whip routes and, blaze outs and being a versatile dude in your offense. But the hardest thing to do is be that guy on the outside that can win go balls, win back shoulders, win hitch routes consistently. And with him, I see elite explosive ability and I see elite stopping ability. You see him really run, some crisp hitches and some crisp comebacks that when, bigger wide receivers struggle to slow down and be sudden in that regard. And I have not seen that with Quentin Johnston. To me, like the best comp that I've seen for him is calling him a bigger Brandon Ayuk, which if you think of Ayuk coming out of Arizona State, everyone's like, oh, he runs the slant. He runs like two routes, whatever. Like he's not, complete route runner. But those routes he's elite at. And like, you don't need too much more if you're that good at those routes. And I think we've seen that with Ayuk. And I think we may see that with Quentin Johnston.
Guy that I know a lot of people really like is Jalin Hyatt. Now, I'm not sure the NFL agrees. I've seen Jalin fifth among wide receivers in most people's big boards. He did run a 4.4 at 6'1", but he's only 176 pounds. And he also played in the offense that we already talked about where it's a bit gimmicky. So how do you go about evaluating Jalin Hyatt? Dude does seem very, very skinny.
He's tough. He's a tough eval because, as you mentioned, he's skinny. He's like his trait on tape that you're like, okay, that's special is his speed. But then, 4.4 at the combine, did he look special on tape because he's getting these free releases from the slot and can build up speed? Or is he actually, maybe plays faster than he tests, which some guys do, but to be that big of a threat just on a pure deep guy, which is really all he was at Tennessee, like he's not good after the catch. He's not a, complete route runner by any means. He doesn't look anything like the guys we saw last year in Wilson, Chris Olave, who were like smaller and you're like, okay, they can get by in the route running. That's not the case with Hyatt. He is just a deep guy. And so I just have more concerns about him. He's not even in my top 5 receivers. I think he's down the board for me, like 8th, 9th, because of all that I just said.
So can you explain to us why the Tennessee offense is seen as so gimmicky? It sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they really spread it out and then they stick their dude, Jalin Hyatt, in the slot, and he just has free access to run up the middle of the field. He's never going to see any loaded coverage or anything like that. But can you sort of expand on why it's gimmicky?
Yeah, so Tennessee, what they'll do, most plays, it'll look something like, 4 wide sets and 1 back in the backfield. So it's like, and the 2 wide receivers on each side will be all the way out onto the sideline, basically. Like pretty close, or one guy will be split in a little bit, but you're basically making multiple defenders choose whether they are run defenders or whether they're pass defenders, getting them so far out of the formation that they can't get involved versus the run. And so then they're just playing numbers from that. They're looking at, hey, I have 2 over here. They only have 2 defenders over there. That means one of those guys is going to get open on whatever combo we run them. So a lot of the stuff he was doing was being the slot guy, which would be off the line of scrimmage. So you can't even press him to begin with. Whereas like Cedric Tillman would be on the outside seeing press, and then they'd run interference routes on the outside. They would do either like a slant wheel. They would do maybe 2 verticals. One breaks it off for a dig, something like that. And that's why we're talking about Hendon Hooker. He's only having to read that one pairing of guys and what to do with the football, because there's no other real option if, he looks one way and there's nothing there. So that was the offense. And that's what Hyatt was doing, was either a lot of the times he's getting open, it's either a double move from the slot from off coverage with no one jamming him, or wheels, things like that. That's how we racked up a ton of touchdowns. And that's just something that just flat out doesn't exist, in the NFL. It's a lot of targets he had just will not ever present themselves in the National Football League.
You said you had 2 slam dunk first round grades. They were Quentin Johnston and JSN?
Yes, those are the top 2.
Okay. Any interest in these small slot guys down the board? Josh Downs out of North Carolina, Tyler Scott out of Cincy. They're both like 5'8", 5'9", 170. I've seen some like Tyler Lockett comps on Tyler Scott. Any interest? Do you think these guys can have any NFL impact?
I think Downs can. I think Downs he's not too far behind Jaxon Smith-Njigba in terms of, I know he's going to be very good from the slot. He's a very creative route runner. He knows how to use leverage, knows how to get open. It's just he's, a lot smaller frame and just going to be limited when that's the case in terms of what more you can do. Because I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a slot, but if you really are just running too wide, you're still putting him out there. He's not coming off the football field. Whereas Downs, I would not put him out there out wide and too wide set. I just don't think you're going to utilize him in a progression. So that's probably the biggest difference there. But I feel really good about him. If he goes, that's a situation dependent one. He goes to somewhere where they use 3 wide, they use a slot consistently. Say I'm trying to think, maybe like Buffalo is a place where that would be the case. I think he could be a valuable piece and produce there. But if he goes to somewhere else where that's not the case, like if he goes to like Baltimore or something, he's done. Like he's not going to produce. So that's how I feel about Downs. Scott's unique in that I'm not sure he has to go to the slot. Obviously, he's not the biggest dude, but he has the kind of the explosiveness and the speed to scare you deep. And I'm intrigued because he wasn't a wide receiver in high school. He was like a running back, DB, and that you really saw improvement from him over 3 years at Cincinnati. And it's like, well, he's kind of new still to the position. Maybe he could figure it out, because I think he's a little more sudden, a little more dynamic after the catch than even like Jalin Hyatt. Like he's a poor man Zay Flowers in this draft class, with just that's kind of how Zay looked maybe earlier in his career at Boston College before he got that 4th year and obviously blew up this past fall. I could see some of that with Scott because he's only a junior coming out, only 3rd year. But I don't think it's any time, year 1, year 2. He's definitely like in the project type of mold.
Okay. There's some other guys that people are excited about. I've seen Marvin Mims. There seems to be like a fan base of Marvin Mims out there. Jonathan Mingo seems like he has a bunch of fans out there. Any thoughts on those guys? And then we need a deep sleeper for the dynasty freaks from you if you got anyone off the board at the wide receiver position.
So Marvin Mims, I like as like a number 3 in the NFL. I think he's your vertical number 3, like a Quez Watkins. I just think he's a little, he just lacks the physicality to really be a number 1 or number 2. And obviously he's on the smaller side for the position. So I think there's a role for him at the next level. I just don't see super high end. Who was the other one there that you were saying?
Mingo.
Jonathan Mingo. Okay, yeah, Ole Miss wide receiver. I think he's really good. I think he's a top 100 player in this class. I think I would be surprised if he doesn't get drafted in that regard. Unique sort of size, build, kind of like reminiscent of like a Laviska Shenault, which is obviously like not where you want the comps to go. But I do think he has after the catch ability and some improvement as a route runner that gets me excited about him.
And we need a favorite of you, a favorite sleeper wide receiver in this class.
My favorite sleeper wide receiver in this class is Grant DuBose from Charlotte. This guy is not the most like physically imposing. I don't think his testing numbers were like great at all, but he has the body control that I think wins at the next level, and size. He's 6'2", over 200 pounds. And I see him make plays outside of his frame with just such relative ease that I'm just intrigued by what he's going to do. He's like a day 3 pick for sure. But I think at that level, there's a lot of guys who are capped in the impact they can make. I think he could be a legitimate number 2 wide receiver at the NFL level if like everything goes right, if you really develop that guy. So Grant DuBose is my day 3 sleeper.
Grant DuBose. I'd be lying if I said I ever heard of him before, but now I see he does have a 5th or 6th round grade here. So what could go wrong with Grant DuBose? All right. This is awesome. Appreciate the time, Mike. Tell the people where they can find you on the Twitter machine or anywhere else where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me at Twitter, PFF_Mike, and go find my draft guide on PFF.com if you are so inclined. If you liked any of the stuff I said, any of my takes, they're all in there. All 200 players in there.
All right. Appreciate the time, Mike. Don't forget about everyone out there. Don't forget about USFL starting on Saturday if you're interested in playing DFS for that. Evan and I will be back sometime the next week to cover what we didn't cover today, running backs and tight ends. For Mike, for Evan, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.